This content should not be construed as financial or investment advice. I am simply sharing my personal views and perspectives, which I hope will educate and inform and help give you the confidence to make your own financial decisions. If you need financial or investment advice, please seek in-person advice from a qualified, experienced, and regulated finance professional. YouTube will not save you. Okay then, so we're going to check out this video by Lionel B series about Mayweather. And we're just going to be speculating here about his financial predicament. So at the time of recording, Mayweather is believed to be scheduling a fight with Manny Pacquiao on the 19th of September. Now, this is a fight that hasn't been highly anticipated, mainly because they're well past their prime. So Mayweather is currently 48 years old. I believe Manny Pacquiao is about 46. And they will be looking to fight at around, I think Mayweather will be actually 49 when they actually fight. And then he has a series of other exhibition fights. So I believe he'll be fighting Mike Tyson in a Democratic Republic of Congo, and then a retired fighter in Greece. This is a kickboxer in Greece later on in the year as well. So those two fights will happen. And then this fight, which will actually be a professional fight with Manny Pacquiao on September the 19th. And it will be a professional fight in the sense that his 50-0 record will be up for grabs. So the question here, and it's been online quite a bit actually, is why would Mayweather be taking these fights on if he is somebody who shouldn't really need to from a financial perspective? Why would anyone at the age of 48, 49, certainly in Mayweather's position, enter into or agree to these fights? And is it because he's essentially running out of money and is going broke? So this is the speculation that has been doing the rounds online. And I thought this video by Lionel B series covers some of those things in an interesting way. I think it's something we can learn from in terms of our own financial positions. So I thought I'd check this video out. So let's see what we can learn.
They call him Money Mayweather. 50 wins, 0 losses, over $1.2 billion in career earnings. This man didn't just win fights, he redefined what it meant to be rich in sports. The mountain of cash on the bed, the $18 billion watch.
Yeah, and he really did redefine things. So an athlete earning 1.2 billion is rarefied, space. So the likes of, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, this is the level we're talking about. It's an insane amount of money to be earning as a professional athlete. And it is a testament to his ability to generate interest in what he does, in his notoriety, in his personality, and build his brand. Love him or loathe him. A lot of the attention the sport of boxing garnered was because of Mayweather. And he really redefined how we think about fights going forward in terms of the idea of an A side, B side, and these big spectacles of what boxing became. So, despite the fact that he's earned 1.2 billion in money, and also this is not necessarily even including endorsements and separate marketing deals and advertising deals and sponsorship deals, it's almost just as amazing that we're finding ourselves in a situation where we're speculating as to whether or not he's now broke. How does someone who's earned that much find themselves in a situation where at the age of 48, 49, for whatever reason, they want to get back in the ring as a professional?
2 private jets, the color-coded Rolls Royces. We all saw it. We all talked about it. But here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. It's 2026 and the money persona, the whole thing, is officially hitting a wall of reality.
As I say, it is something that is online quite a bit. So although, this idea that it's the quiet part not being said out loud, I think if you look online, I think people are speaking about this very, very loudly and quite enjoying the fact, because of the person he is and the notoriety he has, many people are taking pleasure in the fact that, on the face of it, it looks like his finances aren't going well.
Floyd Mayweather is not relaxing on a beach somewhere counting stacks. He is in panic mode. He's booking exhibition fights in the Congo and Greece. He's suing former partners for hundreds of millions of dollars. He is fighting eviction from a New York penthouse while claiming to own a $40 million real estate empire. The king of the money team is fighting for his financial life. And today, we're going behind the velvet rope to show you exactly how $1 billion evaporated into thin air. I'm Lionel B, and this is a story you needed to hear. Now, alright, let's start with something called the burn rate. In finance, your burn rate is how fast you're spending money.
Yeah, so that is correct, and I think it's a good term to introduce. So what your burn rate essentially is how much money you're losing each month. So if your incomings is about $1,000 or £1,000, but your outgoings are about £1,200 or dollars, then your burn rate per month will be $200. So that's essentially what your burn rate is. It's basically how much money you're losing each month. Now, from a business perspective, what it would mean is that if you're a business that is scaling, so this is a growth business that is basically entering into the market and trying to disrupt the market and gain market share, they would also be burning cash. They would also have a burn rate, which would ideally be as long as possible to give them enough time to develop their offering, capture that market share, and then move into a profitability phase. And these are the type of companies that many private equity and venture capital firms or trusts or funds will back. And what that burn rate will indicate is how long that business can survive and cover its outgoings, but before it needs to think about another round of financing, another round of borrowing, essentially. So from a business perspective, that's why a cash burn figure is an important metric for a business. But from a personal finance perspective, what it means is something different. It means you need to think about either increasing your incoming, and this is maybe part of the reason why he's looking at exhibition fights, or you need to reduce your outgoings. Those are the only two options really available to you for most ordinary individuals, right? You don't have the ability to just keep borrowing money or looking for investments or financing. That's not something that will be available to most ordinary people.
Floyd's burn rate is basically a California wildfire.
Yeah, I like that analogy about it being a wildfire because that's what it looks like on the face of it, right? We don't really know what's going on, but when you look at this imagery here and all the money flying around, all the stacks of cash, a wildfire is a napt analogy.
He owns two Gulfstream private jets. Just to keep those birds in the sky, hangar fees, pilots, fuel, maintenance, insurance, and you're looking at somewhere between $4 million and $6 million a year.
Yeah, $4 million, $6 million a year for a two jets is probably quite on the money in terms of how much maintenance will cost. So again, this is why it's important that when we look at things like this, we wouldn't describe a jet and a suite of cars as assets unless there was something special about these things. So if you think about a car, if it's a classic car, if it's a one of one car, if it's a special edition car, a custom car that has some tie or heritage with respect to the actual brand itself. So you think about Ferraris and Koenigsegg's, for example, Bugattis, where there's a lot of heritage around those names, then they may be things that appreciate because there'll be others who are in a similar level of wealth as yourself, as the owner, who may want to buy that car from you. But when you think about a jet, again, owning a jet will probably be considered a financial liability. And the way I suspect, and I don't know this for a fact, but the way I suspect many billionaires will own a jet is basically as a business asset. So it'll be something that is acquired through a financial vehicle like a business, and then they'll be granted business use of that particular asset. And it might even be the same with real estate as well, where it's held by a company, but then you are granted use to that real estate as somebody who controls the company. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that those that are very, very wealthy, my suspicion is they're doing these things and acquiring access to these things in a tax efficient way. whilst what it sounds like and what we're speculating on with respect to Mayweather is that he's buying these things as personal assets and therefore incurring personal expenses where there's limited use with respect to offsetting any taxable profits, because you can't take your personal losses and offset them against any personal any sort of personal tax liabilities, but you can take business losses and potentially use them to lower your tax bill or your business tax bill. So that is why my suspicion is, based on what was being outlined here, that Mayweather is potentially acquiring these things as personal spend, as personal acquisitions, and therefore it's creating a lot of personal liabilities.
That's up to $12 million a year just for the planes. Not trips, not vacations, just keeping them ready. Then you got the car fleets. White cars in Vegas, black cars in LA. Over 100 luxury vehicles, Bugattis, Ferraris, Rolls Royces, Lambos, all losing value the second the tires touch the pavement.
Yeah, and again, this will be a good example of this as well, where broadly speaking, we would assume that this creates massive liabilities. But again, what some people have done, and I believe this is the case with Fernando Alonso, for example, who's a famous Formula One driver, is that he has a lot of Formula One cars. And Jay Leno, I believe, as well, is another guy that has a lot of cars. But what they can do, and what I believe some of them do, is they open it up to the public as an exhibition, and there may be fees involved. And I'm not saying these individuals are doing that, but that is one way of taking something like this, which would be a massive spectacle, which would be of interest to people, and monetizing it that way and saying, okay, well, look, if you want to see what I've got, here's an entrance fee. Come and look around, come and inspect the vehicles, you know. So again, my suspicion is this is not something Mayweather is doing, but this will be something that car collectors may do as a way of offsetting this maintenance cost. Because if you don't do these kind of things, then it will just be a massive liability in terms of storage, in terms of insurance, upkeep, fuel, etc., etc.
And then there's the entourage. Look, I understand loyalty. Floyd came from nothing in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he built his team. But we're talking dozens of bodyguards, personal assistants, chefs, drivers, stylists, a full entourage that he's still running at peak 2015 levels.
Yeah, and I think this is also a good point as well. So when you think about what your outgoings are, certainly as a professional athlete or a famous person, that does need to be reassessed periodically, say every year, every 6 months, because does he still need these same people now that he's no longer boxing? And an obvious example here would be, okay, does he still need a strength and conditioning coach if he's no longer boxing? And now we know he is staying active. And obviously, part of the reason this video is being made is because he is going to presumably have another professional fight. But the perception he gave everybody after his 50th fight was that he was not going to be fighting again. You know, he's made all the money he needs to make, and now he's just going to be focusing on business opportunities. So if that had been the original plan, why would he need those individuals, for example, like the coach, fitness specialist, strength conditioning specialist, etc., etc.? And then when it comes to bodyguards, again, this would be something again where it would be relevant for him because he is famous. But does he need this many? Does he need them all the time? Can he stay at home more? And therefore, that would reduce the need by the fact that he's not out there as much. He's not as accessible. So, again, this is something that you always need to think about, because when you have staff working for you, whether that's on your jets, looking after your cars, or looking after you, unless they are contractors themselves, you may be liable for things like pensions, medical, um, and you may be exposed if they are injured on the job as well. You may get sued. Certainly in America, it's a very litigious country. So that might be something you're exposed to as well. So these are all things you just need to think about, I think, when thinking about your circumstances and how they change over time. So when he was at the height of his earning powers, a lot of this stuff could be justified financially. But then as that tapers off naturally, and the way you earn is more modest, because again, if he's earning through investments and dividends and things like that, and rental income, if he has this 44 million pound portfolio of properties, then obviously that's going to be a lot more modest relative to what was happening before. And therefore you need to adjust what you're spending against what you're now earning accordingly.
2025 income. Here's the fundamental problem with all of this. When Floyd was fighting Manny Pacquiao and Conor McGregor, he was pulling in 100 million, 200 million, 300 million a fight. That money could absorb the lifestyle, but those days are gone. The exhibition fight circuit pays a fraction of that, maybe 10 to 30 million, before taxes, before the entourage, before the jets, before the cars. He is no longer living off the interest of his wealth. He is eating through the principal.
Yeah, and that's a really good point here, and something to take note of. So when Lionel mentions eating through the principal, essentially what that means is that he's having to sell off underlying assets to cover his daily outgoings. And that's clearly not a sustainable strategy. What you want to do is build up your asset base, the principal, use that to generate income, because if it's an asset, it should be generating income for you. And then that income is what covers your outgoings. And in that scenario, you're in a position where you can keep building that wealth base, because assets is the thing that makes you wealthy, right? Not this spectacle of having stuff, having cars, having jets. That is not what wealth is. Wealth is assets fundamentally. So a practical example of this might be, he has 44 million pounds or dollars invested in real estate. There is a rumor that actually it's a minority stake, but let's assume he has 44 million in real estate in New York. And let's assume he's earning 100,000 per year. I'm just making figures up. 100,000 per year in rental income. I mean, that's not a crazy return, but again, I'm just making these figures up. Then what he would have to do is make sure that after tax, whatever that number looks like, so let's imagine it's 60,000, again, making it all up, his outgoings have to be around 40,000 a year. That's basically what has to happen. And if he doesn't do that, he's going to quickly find that eventually he's going to be in a situation where he has to start selling assets to cover the outgoings. And this is what the speculation is about, right? His spending is so high that despite the level of wealth he's accumulated, that the interest and the returns he's generating off those assets are still not enough to cover this outlandish spending that we're seeing and observing on screen here.
Now let's talk about something a lot of people don't want to discuss because it hits different when you realize Floyd doesn't drink, doesn't do drugs, never has. He is famously clean living, but everybody has a drug, and Floyd's drug is adrenaline. When you have been fighting in front of 20,000 screaming people since you were a teenager, when your whole identity is built around the rush of competition, when you retire from the ring, that adrenaline has to go somewhere. And for Floyd, it went to the sports book.
Yeah, and this is a very interesting observation because it seems as though many retired athletes, and it's something, I want to say Paul Merson, but a footballer, and many footballers have talked about this in the UK. So this would be soccer for any Americans who may be watching this, where again, they've all, a lot of them have become addicted to gambling. And it might have been an addiction that developed whilst they were professionals, but they would have had a lot of money to cover any gambling debts they may have. But obviously, once you've retired, you've got a lot more time on your hands. You're not distracted by training and being around your teammates. You don't need to work because you have a lot of money. So therefore, you've got more time to indulge in any potential vices you may have. And how, as an athlete, do you replicate that high of scoring a goal or knocking someone out or winning a race? It's very, very difficult to think about what could simulate that feeling other than potentially, going to a casino and or the races or whatever it is, and winning a lot of money. So it's just interesting that we see this pattern with many retired athletes that struggle with making that transition from a very successful professional career into a life of a normality.
We've all seen the Instagram posts. Floyd holding winning tickets, massive payouts, flexing the wins, but here is what nobody shows you: the losses.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to note when you see any individuals showing all these winnings. What you will never see is the losses. And that's a general thing with gambling in the gambling industry. They will always be highlighting the winners. But for the number of winners you see, there's 99% of people are losing. And ultimately the only winners is the house. Because they are a business and it's structured in a way where they need to be profitable. And the only way they're going to be profitable is if most people lose.
Oh, they are staggering. He reportedly lost 10 million on a single Super Bowl bet. Now think about this. When he wins at gambling, the IRS takes their cut, federal taxes and state taxes. When he loses, he eats the full 10 million.
And this is why, again, gambling to me, I would consider, for many reasons, a waste of time. Because if you're in a situation, certainly in America, where if you're making a gain, you're going to be taxed. But if you're making losses, those losses aren't tax deductible. It just compounds the fact that gambling doesn't make a good financial. It's not a good financial choice. Now, if it's just a bit of fun, you're just having a laugh, and you stick within a budget, that's one thing. But ultimately, it's not a strategy, um, or a sensible strategy, in my view. Again, I'm not a financial advisor, but this is just my opinion. To thinking about building wealth or even having any expectation that you're going to win more than you're going to lose. You have to assume that in most scenarios, if you gamble, that money is gone, and therefore you should set your spending based on what you can afford to lose. Nothing more than that. If you are going to gamble, and I think the other thing to consider as well, certainly in the UK, is that broadly speaking, gambling winnings are not taxable. But if you are a professional gambler, then it may be that you do come into scope for income tax. So again, you do need to be very, very clear wherever you are based in the world around the tax legislation, just so that you're not caught out. Because I can imagine in a scenario where somebody is making these massive gains, but then forgetting that there is a tax obligation potentially.
But it gets worse. In 2024, rumors exploded online that Floyd Mayweather was being detained in Dubai over massive gambling debts. Not to a casino, but to some very unregulated creditors.
Unregulated creditors to me is code for uh, allegedly criminals essentially. So you're borrowing money unofficially from people. Loan sharks is what they would probably call them in films, right? So we don't know what's going on. This is highly speculative, and we have to say it would be allegedly what is going on. But again, when when he says something about like you know unregulated individuals, where cash is king, I think we can all read between the lines here about what he's alluding to.
People who don't use lawyers, people who don't send polite letters. Now, Floyd's team denied it, said it was just a misunderstanding, said he was there for business. But here's my question: when does a billionaire get stuck in a foreign country over a misunderstanding about cash? The answer is he doesn't, unless he's not actually a billionaire anymore. Unless he is operating in a gray market of debt where his name and his brand are writing checks that his bank can't cash.
Yeah, and again, he uses the term grey market of debt, or another term might be black market. So basically, again, it's alluding to this idea that he's borrowing money from people that most of us typically wouldn't borrow money from. So if you're going to borrow money, it will typically be from a bank, from a payday lender, or maybe a pawn shop. Right? Those are probably the main places you'd borrow money from, unless you borrow from friends and family. Outside of that, I think we can all use our imagination around where else somebody may seek financing from, where the only acceptable method of repayment is off the record cash.
And when you owe people who operate outside the legal system, you need cash. Fast, clean, no questions asked. Which explains why Floyd Mayweather is suddenly willing to fight anyone, anywhere, anytime, not for legacy, for liquidity. Now listen, I understand. Some of you might be saying, Lionel B, you don't know that. That is straight up speculation. So let's stop speculating. Let's go
It's all speculation, and we don't know that. But yeah, we'll continue.
Straight to the paper trail because the receipts are everywhere and they are damning. Receipt number 1, late 2025. Floyd Mayweather is sued for eviction from a luxury New York apartment. A man who publicly claims to own a $40 million real estate empire was reportedly more than $500,000 behind on rent.
Yeah, and again, there is a disconnect there, which again, I wouldn't argue this is a receipt. This is all coincidental in terms of what we're observing here. But again, if you are somebody that's positioning yourself as understanding the value of real estate investment, but then you're renting and then you can't cover the rent, it's certainly not a good look. So I think we can understand what Lionel is alluding to here, and it is a fair observation, but it's not conclusive evidence, and it's not like the strongest of receipts in that regard, I'd say. But we can certainly accept the context of what's going on and the perception for sure.
Receipt number 2. AJ's Jewelry in Miami files a lawsuit claiming Floyd walked out of their store with $1.6 million worth of jewelry, paid with 5 checks to cover it.
Who uses checks? Like, honestly, in some ways, I kind of feel like that's the jeweler's fault, because why are you accepting checks? I don't care who it is. Checks is not the way forward in the 21st century.
Receipt number 3. Logan Paul. 5 years after their exhibition fight, Logan is still publicly claiming Floyd Mayweather owes him $1.5 million from their deal. And Logan is not a broke YouTuber anymore. He is a WWE champion with prime hydration money.
And I agree. I would agree with that, because again, this is all speculation. It's all coincidental. It's not, you know, absolute proof. But again, 1.5 million to someone like Logan Paul is pocket change. It's not really anything. So he has no reason to lie about the fact that it's still owed. And also, he would be open to a defamation lawsuit if he was really lying, because it would be damaging to Mayweather and his image, and he would be open to that, such a lawsuit. So the fact that he's confident enough to say this, and he said it repeatedly, and the fact that from his perspective the amount of money is relatively trivial, so it's more about a matter of principle. This positioning from Logan Paul does carry some weight in that regard. So I would agree with this assessment from Lionel.
Now, y'all, when you connect the dots, jewelry, checks bouncing, rent going unpaid, fighters claiming non-payment, it looks less like isolated incidents and more like Mayweather Promotions is running a shell game, using money from new fights to plug holes from old debts. Now, receipt number 4, and this one is government official. After the Conor McGregor fight in 2017, Floyd earned somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 million. And yet, the IRS filed a $22 million tax lien against him shortly.
Yeah, and this was something actually Conor McGregor talked about in the build up to the fight, that he needed the fight to cover his tax bills. But the fact that they've put a lien on it, so this would be the IRS, I suspect, that have put a lien on his earnings to make sure that basically they've put their flag in the sand when it comes to that 300 million that he reportedly made, to make sure that as soon as he gets it, he needs to cover this 24 million tax bill. Now, assuming what we're seeing here is correct, then again, it's not a good look for somebody who's positioning themselves as being, super wealthy and all about the money, right? It's not the kind of predicament you would find yourself in. Because if you're worth 1.2 billion or more, you should have a small army of tax accountants, financial advisors, and I would argue they should be on retainer, actually. So this would be, they're there at your beck and call, subject to, paying them whatever amount it is per month. And ideally, these individuals will have connections with those in the IRS and the state tax authorities to basically make sure that you're ahead of the curve of all your tax obligations, and or you have appropriate and effective tax planning in place. So you should never really find yourself in a situation where there's a lien against your future earnings, or there's this outstanding debt that you weren't aware of, which when it comes to the IRS, it will be subject to penalties as well as compounding interest. So these are definitely things you want to avoid, as somebody who has a lot of money. And it's something that should be within your powers to avoid, by virtue of the fact that you have enough money to pay for the right advice.
Now I want to talk about something that requires some sensitivity, because this part, it isn't funny. This part is actually tragic. A lot of you remember the story about 50 Cent challenging Floyd to read a full page of Harry Potter live on camera. People laughed at it and it became a meme. But underneath that meme is a reality that has devastating financial consequences.
This is a special ASLELS challenge for you, Floyd. If you can read one full page of a Harry Potter book, I'll give $750,000 to whatever charitable organization you want to. Fuck the bucket of ice, man.
Whether it's a dyslexia, limited formal education, or something else entirely, if you're running a billion-dollar empire and you cannot personally audit a 40-page legal contract, you are entirely at the mercy of people around you.
Yeah, so I'm not entirely in agreement with that position. So, whether you can read or you can't read, or whether you're educated or not educated, unless you have legal formal training, there wouldn't be this expectation that you could audit a 40-page commercial contract. What you need to be able to do actually is recognize that fact and ensure you've got the right legal advice and the legal professional qualified individuals that can review that contract, audit it on your behalf, because they should have a fiduciary duty to act in your best interests. But then you should be knowledgeable enough to challenge them and challenge their assertions, challenge their conclusions, challenge their advice, and seek explanations and make sure you are satisfied. So ultimately, you're going to remain accountable for whether or not that contract is signed or modified, etc. But ultimately, you're going to rely initially on a finance or accounting professional, sorry, a legal professional, whether that be a solicitor or a lawyer, depending on whether you're in the UK or in the US, to do that auditing for you. That would be my position. But it doesn't help if you yourself cannot read and are not familiar or don't have at least a high level understanding of law principles and contract law, and how business works from a contractual perspective. So there is a need to keep educating yourself in that space, I would say, if you are somebody who is an entrepreneur.
Your lawyers, your advisors, your managers, your inner circle. And if any of those people decides to exploit that blind spot, you would never know until it was too late.
Yeah, so that bit I do agree with, because again, the less education you have and the less familiarity you have with running a business, and the legal obligations and the compliance obligations that come with that, you are in a position where you are potentially could be exploited. So as I said, although these professionals are governed by professional ethics and need to act on your behalf, you do need to be in a position where you can challenge the advice you're given, as I say, because ultimately you're going to be accountable for the outcome of that, irrespective of whether or not that advice is good or bad. So if you don't end up paying the right amount of taxes, your defense can't be in front of a judge, let's say, well, I was only doing what my tax advisors told me to do. Because again, in their arrangement with you, they will limit their liability. So even if you then sue them off the back of that, what you can win in terms of successfully suing them will be limited as well. So that's something else you do need to consider. That responsibility will always be yourself to make sure you're paying the right amount of taxes, for example, and that you're happy with contracts you're entering into. But what you also need to do in order to make sure you're in the best possible place possible, and in the most informed place possible, is seek advice from qualified experts with that specialist knowledge. So it's a combination of the two things, I would say.
Brings us, y'all, to February 2026. Floyd Mayweather files a $340 million lawsuit against Showtime and several former advisors, alleging that hundreds of millions of dollars from his biggest fights were quietly funneled into third-party accounts he never knew existed, under agreements he never personally reviewed. Now, Floyd's legal team claims that when they requested a full financial records and accounting documentation from Showtime, they were told the records were lost in a flood. Not misplaced, not delayed, lost in a flood on financial records worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, I want you all to sit with that for a second, because you genuinely cannot make this up.
I mean, that is crazy, actually. And clearly they did make it up, because, if there's a lawsuit and, if there are lawsuits, there's a process called discovery. where both sides need to open up their books essentially. And what you're being told is that the records we had were lost in a flood. That is a crazy thing to be hearing, and it does sound, to me anyway, like they're just making it up. But if it were to be true, it would be a case of reality being stranger than fiction. So yeah, although he's saying you couldn't make it up, my suspicion is that it's entirely made up, and the whole thing is just a shady mess.
There are really only two possibilities. Possibility one, Floyd's inner circle, the people he trusted and paid for decades, genuinely robbed him blind, exploiting his inability to audit and read his own contracts. And they got away with it for years because Floyd's brand was so big, the money kept flowing, and nobody looked too closely at where it was actually going. Possibility two, Floyd is desperately trying to claw back any cash he can find to cover his mounting debts, and this lawsuit is a legal instrument designed to generate leverage, settlement offers, and press coverage that keeps investors and creditors nervous enough to give him some breathing room.
Yeah, it could be a mixture of both, because again, if he's been relying on friends and family to give him, legal advice, accounting advice, tax advice, then there will be an element of those personal relationships being taken advantage of, and leveraged. Um, so there may be that element. But I also think, there is an element as well of him trying to recover, money that he may be owed, or thinks he may be owed, or thinks there's an opportunity to gain extra income to cover whatever it is needs to be covered, from a financial perspective. It's akin to like looking down the back of your sofa for any loose change because you've got to pay the energy bill. So I would argue there's a bit of both going on here. And again, when you add in the fact that he's taking these exhibition fights, he's taking another professional fight at the age he's taking, it would indicate that there is a need for this money. It doesn't tell us how rich or wealthy he is. Like, we still don't know this, but it just seems unusual, that when you put all of these things together, plus the fact that he's allegedly being sued for outstanding rent, and there was a lien against the winnings that he received after his Conor McGregor fight, it would suggest he is cash poor, even if he's asset rich.
The real story is the same. Floyd Mayweather, the man who branded himself the greatest financial mind in boxing, does not have control of his own money. And he may never have. So that brings us to right now, y'all, in 2026. And that's Floyd's current fight schedule. It actually tells you everything you need to know. He has a fight lined up in the Democratic Republic of Congo against a 60-year-old opponent. Now listen, I ain't knocking the Congo, great country, beautiful people, but Floyd Mayweather fighting there is not a legacy move. It's not a goodwill tour. It's a my private jet needs fuel move. It's taking any check available in any market that will cut it. Then there's an exhibition fight, y'all, in Greece against a retired kickboxer. The reason Greece, because it bypasses a Nevada State Athletic Commission's regulations, which means less oversight, lower costs, and a quicker payday. Floyd is optimizing for cash speed, not legacy. And finally, the rematch, Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather, reportedly being negotiated for the Sphere in Las Vegas, distributed on Netflix.
Yeah, Netflix seems to be the place to go now for all these exhibition fights. So obviously we have the Zone, which does a lot of sort of more serious fights. I know they've had some spectacle fights on there as well. I think they have the Anthony Joshua, Logan Paul fight. Is it Logan Paul or was it his brother? Jake Paul. Sorry. But yeah, it seems to be that is the place to go now. So I think the Tyson Fury fight that's coming up as well, his tune-up fight before potentially fighting Anthony Joshua at the time of recording this video, will also be on Netflix. And then the Anthony Joshua fight against Jake Paul was also on Netflix, I believe, as well, if I remember correctly. So that does seem to be the place to go for these big money exhibition fights. And it tells you where we are now, where we've got, essentially two men, two greats of the sports, don't get it wrong, who are now basically going to be 50 or so, entering into a professional fight. And is it a sanctioned fight? I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if it's not. And is this the only place where it could actually happen? And one has to question why they would do it. I think with Pacquiao, there's an itch there that he wants to scratch in terms of getting that win over Mayweather. And I think with Mayweather, who knows? Who knows what's going on here? But, you know, the theory that's being presented here is one that is, shared amongst many commentators on YouTube, and it does hang together. So that is why I'm entertaining this video and entertaining these thoughts from Lionel.
This isn't a victory lap. This is a fire sale of the only asset Floyd has left, his name. And the saddest part, the checks from these fights, even the Pacquiao rematch, will not solve the underlying problem. Because if the burn rate stays the same and the debt obligation keeps compounding, no single payday is large enough to fix what has been already.
Yeah, and he's right. Unless you address this burn rate, unless you address the outgoings, then this is just a sticky plaster solution if this theory is correct. And it just means that eventually Mayweather will run out of money, will run out of assets. It will just take a bit longer off the back of the fact that he can sort of keep extending this run of exhibition fights, keep leveraging his name from a fight perspective, and keep marketing his name to have these one-off paydays. But he ultimately would need to address the underlying spending. That is for sure. If what we're hearing and seeing here is to be true.
You cannot outrun a structural financial collapse with exhibition fight money. You need to change the structure, sell the jets, cut the entourage, downsize the lifestyle, invest the remainder. That's the only math that works. And that is exactly what Floyd Mayweather cannot bring himself to do. Now here's the truth that ties everything together. Floyd is not just broke or getting close to broke, he is a prisoner of his own brand.
Yeah, and I fully agree with this positioning. There is an element of trying to maintain an image, maintain the perception, maintain how people see you. And I think it's really important, certainly when it comes to personal finances in particular, that you try and move away from that mindset, and focus on your own financial journey, because this all made sense for Floyd Mayweather at the time he was earning, at the height of his earnings. And it would be similar, I respect, with many other people in terms of, okay, when you have a lot of earnings, say early on in your career, relative to your outgoings, it can be justifiable from a financial perspective to take lots of holidays, spend money on lots of clothes. I'm just making things up now, but whatever it is that you value. But then the moment you start having more responsibilities, you have dependents, maybe you have a mortgage or you've got rent to cover, you then have to start thinking a bit more seriously about budgeting and then adjusting your outgoings to ensure that, you don't overspend each month. You're not then living on credit. So that is the principle that ultimately applies here with Floyd Mayweather as well. What made sense for him in his early 20s, early 30s as an active athlete may not make sense anymore. And this whole image he had may have made sense in terms of selling fights, but thereafter, now that he's retired and not selling fights, does what we're seeing here on screen make any sense anymore? And I think that is a fair question coming from Lionel here.
25 years, he constructed an identity. He showed the world that he was the richest, the smartest, the most untouchable man in sports. He was money. He was TBE, the best ever. He was a template. He was the guy who always won in the ring and outside of it. And the downsides now, to sell a jet, to let the entourage go, to move into a normal house, to say publicly the era is over, that would be a form of psychological suicide for Floyd Mayweather. Because the money persona isn't just a brand, it's his entire identity.
And there may be some truth in that as well, because when you think about billionaires we're aware of, they appear relatively modest in terms of how they present themselves. They don't have jewelry hanging off them, crazy looking watches on their arms. They have a lot of assets, but they'll be boring things like land, property, commodities, futures, businesses, right? And that is where a lot of their wealth will be tied up. And then any spending they're doing tends to be spending based on borrowing. actually. Because ultimately the game is around building more and more assets, more and more essential resources, and then using that to then generate further wealth, further income, to then buy more assets. That is ultimately the game they're playing. So in many ways, although they have massive amounts of assets, you don't, it's not in your face. You don't really see it. Whilst with Mayweather, all the yachts, the stacks of cash, why is there this need to show everything? But again, it's not consistent with many billionaires we can think of. And that's the billionaires we see. There'll be many billionaire families and billionaires who have never seen the public light of day. Like, you won't know who they are. And as I say, they really will move in silence. And they may live on their own islands. They may live in tax havens. They're not part of normal society in many ways. And that's not a criticism. All I'm saying is that it's just interesting that he doesn't behave, let's say, or move in the same way as the famous billionaires we come across. So it is an interesting dynamic. And one would suggest that, okay, well, what is it about him that he feels the need to have to prove and seek validation around his own success from external sources?
He would rather bounce checks to a jewelry store than admit the persona was partly a facade. He would rather fight a 60-year-old in the Congo than admit the big fights are done. He would rather file a $340 million lawsuit than sit quietly and restructure.
Yeah, and I think for me, that would be the argument. I don't think he needs to admit anything. I just think the last bit of advice Lionel gave, where he just needs to sit back quietly, restructure, and just live a relatively private life. Because if he does that and he lives privately, he doesn't have to maintain this image. And I think for me, that's the key thing. So we can still live an extravagant lifestyle. He just doesn't have to show everybody. And therefore, there's no pressure to like have all these cars, have all these jets, etc., etc. So that would be my position.
And that right there is the real reason of Floyd Mayweather's story. Not just the bad investments or the gambling or the entourage, it's the psychological inability to separate self-worth from net worth. It's what happens when your entire identity is built on a number and the number starts going down. Mike Tyson went through it, MC Hammer went through it, and now in real time in 2026, Floyd Money Mayweather is going through it.
Yeah, so really good video from Lionel B series there. So definitely check out his channel, watch the original content, leave comments, like, and if you feel so minded, subscribe. But yeah, I think it was really, really instructive, and I think we can learn a lot here from personal finances perspective as well, where despite the level of wealth and income Mayweather has accumulated, he's potentially and speculatively finding himself in a situation where he still can't manage his outgoings. He still can't manage his personal finances, and therefore he's having to make decisions to essentially work longer than he otherwise would choose to, simply because he can't manage his outgoings and refuses to adjust it, potentially based on what he is now earning. And I think we can all learn a lot from this in terms of applying it to our own situations. So again, I repeat, I'm not a financial advisor, but my advice would always be, think about engaging a financial advisor if you can, and using that advice to think about, okay, how can you optimize your incoming? How can you think about investing? But also, what sort of outgoings can be eliminated or reduced where possible? Because ultimately, that is the thing that's going to protect you from things like lifestyle creep. And that's essentially a crazy, exaggerated version, I think, of what we're seeing with Mayweather, where he's building up these additional expenses, these additional outgoings, because he has all this income to deal with it. But when that income slows down and becomes less regular, he's not then adjusted for that accordingly and applied that sporting discipline into a financial world. So I think for me, that's something that we can learn from that and take away. But hopefully you find that useful. But until next time, peace.